Hey, Jacquire, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Okay, we can see you. My name is Dayan. I work with the Recording Revolution team. Welcome to the call, everyone. Can you hear me? Just leave a message in the chat if you can hear us. Awesome. Great. Thank you all. All right, we're going to get cracking on this Q&A call. Thank you for being with us, Jacquire.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for purchasing the course and being here to ask me some questions today and interact.
The way I'm going to run this is I'm going to first just point out that if you want to leave a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. And if you click that, it allows you to submit a question. That way I can see all the questions and I can also mark them if they've already been answered. Does everyone see that button? Great. Awesome. So I'm going to switch between answering some live questions and also taking some questions that were pre-sent in via email. Hopefully we'll get all of your questions answered. The first question that was pre-sent in is to do with charging for mixes and for production and for recording work. So the question goes as follows. This is from JJ Crowley from Albuquerque. He says, I read in the Quincy Jones book that in the traditional record label model, a producer got 5 or 6 points or % of the profits of an album as payment with some sort of upfront down payment. And Quincy Jones mentions $30,000 as down payment for Michael Jackson's Thriller. As someone starting out as a producer, do you have any advice on how to charge for all-in-one services? That means recording, producing, mixing, and mastering for smaller studio projects. Should you try and get some portion of royalties, or should it be time-based?
Well, okay, there's a lot there. I would. It's a good question, and you know, part of it is based on you know, what the economics. You have to. Everything's case by case, and you know, I don't get to charge the same thing for everybody just because not everybody has the same amount of money. Certainly the major labels have more. And so let's just talk about a little bit about what the information in the Quincy Jones book. What is typically standard for a producer is a 4-point royalty. And then a mixer would get 1-point royalty. Now, some people get less, some people get more, sort of like the A level sort of standard is what I said, the 4 points and the 1 point. As I have done sometimes, if you do both jobs, if you produce and are the mix engineer, then you get those 5 collective points. The amount of money that you are paid, I think the figure was $37,000 that Quincy was paid for Thriller. That is a fee, but the fee is an advance on your potential royalty. So if the project doesn't make it doesn't recoup or doesn't make royalties, then that's the only money you receive. So it's an advance on your royalties, but it's considered a fee. So, you know, these days with record sales being what they are, getting bigger fees certainly is nice because you can you get more money for your time spent because it is a risk. That royalties are not a promise, and there's a certain amount of risk in there. And most things don't make a lot of royalties or any royalties at all. What you should charge all in, how you should think about all in. What I do is I create a budget. I have a discussion with the artist, or management, and it depends on any given situation who you should have a more detailed conversation with. But I create a budget. Based on the number of songs and the time I feel like I'm going to need to spend in the studio, what musicians I may need to hire, and what those additional costs will be, what my engineering expenses are going to be, and just all the different detail, and break all that down so I have kind of a realistic figure for the time that it's going to take and the expenses. And then, I try to consider how much of a fee I can charge on top of it. If you have, just for the sake of argument, if you have a $10,000 budget, and your expenses are $6,000, well, that means $4,000 to you for all your time, and based on the number of songs and the amount of days, it's like, is it enough money to warrant doing it? And sometimes it's it will. Sometimes it's just like, it'll cover my expenses, and I want to do this, or it's a bit better than that, and you're actually earning something that's just beyond paying your bills. So really it's very individual. You have to consider the market you're in, the value you have in that market. Someone who has done more work and has more credits to their name obviously has more value and leverage. Unfortunately, that's just the way things are. The economics of the record business really haven't changed for the last 20 years. I mean, what a day rate for an engineer used to be 15, 20 years ago is pretty much kind of the same. And it, in some senses, it seems like a lot of money. In others, it doesn't, because, if you have a studio and you have all this investment in time and equipment, well, I mean, you've spent a lot of money to be in a position to be able to make records. When you're in situations where you may be, let's just say for the sake of argument, you feel like to produce and mix and record a project, master it, as you said, at a minimum for your time spent, you should be charging, let's, for the sake of argument, say $500. Well, if that's what you should be charging, but there isn't enough budget to cover you, well, then you have to look to make an agreement that perhaps you own part of the masters. Certainly if writing is involved, the publishing can be discussed. Because I make deals for indie projects and low budget stuff where I am actually an owner in the outcome, not just a paid fee with the attachment of a royalty. It's really, what deal can you make? What money can you work for? I think when you're starting out, you're probably going to be looking at budgets that are $10,000 to $15,000. And if your expenses are probably at least half of that, is that enough money for you? Your rates just sort of have to be accordingly. A few little things I'll say just in addition, because this is kind of a broad question. It's a far-reaching question as well. A professional engineer should make somewhere between $250 to $1,000 a day. Now, that's pretty wide ranging, and I would say that the average kind of falls in that, lower side, but maybe $500 a day. To get money north of that, then you really have to be in demand, and you have to have a really powerful skill set and a resume to back it up. Mixers like Michael Brower, Chris Lord-Alge, Andrew Sheps, they charge anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 per mix, plus that royalty. What you have to keep in mind is they're in demand, they can charge it, and they have a lot of expenses. They have attorney's fees, they have management fees, they have studio costs. It takes a lot of people to sort of run a business at that scale. So even though it does sound like an extraordinary amount of money, there's a lot of costs that eat into it. Hopefully some of that information helps, and just make the best possible deal you can for yourself, without sort of continuing to spend your own money to make records. And I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. That was super helpful. Quite a few people actually emailed in questions along those lines. So just following on from that, If an artist has 10 songs that they are ready to be recorded and professionally produced, how much money, ballpark figure, should that artist budget to have a 10-song album produced by a professional of your standard?
Of my standard, I can't justify doing it for probably less than $50,000 because of what my costs are, and what the value of my time, because time is our greatest commodity. To do a 10-song album takes a couple months easy, because by the time you select the songs, get together, record them, and do all the stuff to get them to the place where they're ready for release, it's at least a couple months, So after costs and all the expenses I have, and sort of where I'm at, that would be the minimum. In that kind of a situation, I'm looking for, because my fee is probably 20% of what it would be. It's maybe 15 or 20% of what it would be if I were working for a major label and an established artist, and where that budget might be, because that budget might be $125,000, $150,000, and so the costs, of course, the costs go up, but not so dramatically that so there's a greater amount of money that's in reserve for a fee. In the lower, on a $50,000 record, I'm asking for, some portion of like a small publishing assignment, or to own part of the master. So, to share in the ownership of the master. And it typically, if it's an independent project and I'm looking to own a share of the master, it typically reflects what I would own if it were signed to a major label. So let me just quickly explain how the royalties work on a major label deal. And we'll use some round figures. Sometimes it's a little bit less than this in terms of what the label assigns to the artist and all of the royalty shares. The record label keeps 80%. So that leaves 20% that is divided among the producer and the mixer and the band. So of that 20%, if I'm to get 5%, that is 25% of the royalty share. So to tell an independent artist that when you have to make a deal with them that they don't have enough money to actually pay you even half of your rate, if I'm looking to get 15 to 20% of what my rate would be, then asking them to be a 25% owner in the master has its advantages for me, but it also kind of reflects what my royalty share would be out of the royalties that they would have assigned to them as a major label. Because when you're getting royalties from an artist, the royalties belong to them. When they sign a deal, that 20% of the royalties belongs to them. And so I'm making an agreement, or you would be making an agreement with the artist that they are going to say, okay, these 5 points, this 25%, we will assign to you as your royalty. And so when work is registered with Sound Exchange or anything like that, it's the money that I receive is done on behalf of the artist, because we have to send a letter in that tells Sound Exchange, okay, well, the artist they have assigned this to me, there's a signature, and then so I can receive those royalty payments. So hopefully that helps.
That's super insightful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Following on from that, if an independent artist or band wants to get the attention of someone like yourself or similar producers in a similar league, what's your advice in how they should go about doing that in terms of wanting you to work with them?
Well, you need to have I would advise being sure that you have, you know, a selection of songs that you've written that represent. Now they don't. I'm not saying that they need to be production demos. I'm just saying you need to have uh, some document of your songs that you know, in some demo form. They can be work tapes, but they just need to be a quality where they're listenable. I personally don't really love getting production demos, just because then it kind of takes out some of the it kind of defines the vision for a song. It takes out some of the mystery, but there's nothing wrong with it, because some people need to write and do that so that they can. That's part of their writing process. But have a collection of songs that are documented that you can share. You know, typically I'm personally going to want to see an artist that has it together enough where they've played shows, they know how to promote themselves, they have a little bit of a following. You know, ultimately it's based on the material and the talent that I feel like an artist has, and also whether I feel like I can be a good fit for them. You know, how do you present that? Well, you have to find a means of contact. You know, social media, the internet, managers, attorneys, record labels. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to reach people. You know, like I have a website too. You know, and then present yourself with a link to a show history, a little bit about the band or the artist, the material that you have prepared for the recording for the project, and provide that kind of information. But it's also kind of a delicate thing. You don't want to be overly persistent. You don't want to send too much information. You need to have realistic assessment of where you're at. You need to go into this prepared with some idea of a budget. It's pretty annoying and sort of a waste of time when you get a solicitation from someone and they really haven't thought about all the details, where you have to pick stuff, where it kind of goes from there. I get solicitations and you know, I check most of them out. I mean, honestly, I can't listen to everything, and sometimes I just go on my gut instinct based on the way someone's trying to communicate with me. But you know, if you review stuff, you know, I've gotten into conversations where I thought the material had some promise. I liked the voice, and then I talked to them, and it's just sort of the idea that, well, if someone like myself will pay attention to them, then all these other things will fall into place. That going into the studio with you know, producer A is going to yield interest from record labels and publishers and so forth and so on, and somebody's going to come up with the money. Really having a prepared, realistic plan when you approach someone, I think is something that's overlooked pretty often. Just people get excited with the idea that they have a great song, and they can get in touch with someone that they admire and they think that can help them, and that's all it should be. Well, I mean, honestly, you just kind of need to be as prepared as possible. And the reality is, in the world where everybody's so busy and the record labels are not really in the business of artist development anymore, you have to develop yourself. You have to become broader in your evaluation of yourself and the way you set yourself up in business, and almost be self-sufficient in a way, so that someone can kind of join forces with you and advance what you're already doing, as opposed to basically starting from ground zero with you. It's a kind of a rare occasion where you're going to have something that is so powerful, that's you know, as you're developing, you're going to have something so powerful that someone's going to completely drop everything that they're doing to help you from the ground up. There's over time, I have developed artists, and I try not to do too many of them at the same time. I've learned that one or two of them at a time is kind of enough, and they kind of have to run their course. Some have been successful. There's been several occasions where I've developed someone, gotten them publishing deals, record label deals, but it's a lot of hard work and it takes a long time. I've been working. It typically takes 2 or 3 years of engagement, involvement, development before someone goes from writing songs in their bedroom or garage to the place where they have developed enough and done shows and kind of built a foundation to where they can go out and have a profitable tour, or a label will sign them, or that their material is going to be strong enough to kind of catch on. So it's a lot of information there, you know, so hopefully there's some things in there that are insightful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This question comes from Bobby. How do you stay objective and creatively excited on a project after you hear the same parts over and over during the music creation process?
It's very challenging. No different for me than it is probably anyone else. I think the luxury that I have at this point is I've done it a lot, so I know how to switch it on and off. You know, when I sit down in front of the speakers to work, or I am in a mode of thinking about a project and sort of working on my thoughts and what needs to happen, I switch it on, and then I switch it off. I think it's important to get away from stuff. One of the luxuries I have is that I work on a lot of different stuff at the same time. Sometimes that's very fatiguing, but the upside of it is I have to constantly switch gears and switch my perspective and thinking, because not everything is the same, and the interaction with the artist and the individuals involved in each project is a little bit different. The music's different. You have to kind of have to pay attention to the genre and what feels right for it. It's like a larger way of thinking, in that you, like the advice we hear a lot for when you're mixing, change the volume a lot, listen on different speakers, step away from it. Don't listen to it only between the speakers, listen to it in different environments, take a lot of breaks. That's all great advice when you're mixing, but you can kind of take that into, zoom out and look at projects that way too. It's schedule time off. Don't do it all. Don't just continually grind away at it. If I try to schedule a little bit of time for myself. Maybe it depends. Maybe it's not convenient or conducive for whatever reason, because of schedules or budget, to like record in chunks, and then so much of the time you have to do it all together, and that can be fatiguing and challenge the opportunity to have perspective. So at a minimum, what I always try to do is take a week or two, if at a minimum, but from once I feel like I've concluded the recording and production of a project, before I start to mix it, just so that when I go in as the mixer, I've had a little bit of separation and a little bit of just time away. I also have my assistant engineers prepare the mix sessions and get them as close as they can to where it's a good place for me to sit down and just engage it, as opposed to me sitting there and building the session and importing a template and all that kind of busy work, because that that drains my creative energy away from the opportunity to do the things that I need to do on it. I'm currently finishing in the last stages of finishing 2 projects. One, we're going to do mix revisions today on half of the songs, just small little changes, but I didn't listen. We sent the mixes, and I didn't listen to it for almost a week. And then I listened to it away from the studio and made a few notes. So I'm going to do that stuff today. And then on another project that's just come back from mastering last week, I feel like on a few of the masters that I need to, I'm going to have a comparative listen between my mix before mastering and then after, and then just sort of make an evaluation and kind of communicate with about that. So it's kind of breaking things up and just finding perspective, and sometimes just not listening to music and reading or having a conversation or taking a walk is the best medicine, because we also need to let things just live in our thoughts, to find the insights that we need to remain objective and productive.
Awesome. This next question comes from Elaine. The question is, how do you know when a song is finished? And I think this applies to both producing and mixing. How do you prevent overproducing or overmixing?
Well, in a production, I just feel for me, it's just kind of, evaluating the structure of a song. Does it stay engaging? Does it feel like a journey beginning to end? Do I feel at every change of, new section, do I feel engaged? Sometimes it's hard to know when it is enough. We were cooking at home and we were listening to, I think we must have been listening to like an Adele sort of Pandora kind of playlist where, it's just some of those songs, it's like the only thing on there is a piano, and the piano and her voice, and then when it gets to the bridge, there's a harmony. It's like, so that's like super simple, but she's a huge artist, and you don't necessarily need to have a lot of things going on for it to feel big and successful. It's really just what feels appropriate to supporting the feeling of the song, but that's not overdoing it. That's like just not too much information. It's and everybody's taste is different, so I try to look at like what's the minimum that I can, starting out, what's the minimum that I can frame around a production of a song to make it feel accomplished and important. When things are simpler, there's more effort that needs to be put into making each individual element sound important and contribute. Because if you paint with a lot of colors and a lot of layers, that can be powerful and it is the way to do things sometimes, but then everything needs to be kind of so simple and complementary to layer up, that it doesn't become confusing, there's the balance in that. So I think for me, it's always just like, let's just try and start as simply as possible and as powerfully as possible, and just make sure that the arrangement is like the structure is engaging, and that the performances are engaging. And then from there, it's like if we need to make little additions to expand on the energy or the depth of something, we'll do that. In terms of mixing, for me, it's when the bottom end is feeling substantial and focused, and that all the elements are kind of in their place, and it all feels engaging, and nothing is giving me when I hear it, is giving me the feeling of it needs attention, like, oh, that's too quiet, or it's too loud, or it's kind of annoyingly bright, or it's like something needs a little bit of EQ, or the dynamic of it's inconsistent, needs a little bit of compression, or wouldn't it be nice if that passage of vocal right there had a different effect for emphasis. In a mix, when things stop sort of pulling my attention towards them as needing my attention, needing some sort of touch on them, then then I think the mix is done. When I can just sit there and listen to it and like, yeah, okay, everything seems like in its place. It feels like it's together, and typically the vocal or whatever the leading instrumentation or voice is it's like it's balanced well, and it feels connected to the picture, then I'm done. It's like, well, I'm ready for other people to comment on it. And that's really the best you can do. I mean, for me, because I mean, when is something done? I mean, you can play with it and play with it and mess with it and mess with it, but it's just like, unless you have like a specific idea and a purpose of why you should be doing something, then it's just time to just leave it alone. Because all records sound different. At the end of it, it's more about how it feels than any particular element of sound.
Awesome. Julianne asks, how do you keep track of your workflow, and how long are you on task before taking a break, you know, to help with ear fatigue, or also to avoid wasting a whole day going down a rabbit hole?
Well, like I said, I try to take breaks a lot. What was the first part of the question? Because
how do you keep track of your workflow, and how long are you on task before taking a break?
Well, you know, how do I keep track of my workflow? Well, I mean, for me, well, you know, I'm not entirely sure what the thinking is behind that question in that way. It's just like keeping track of my workflow. I think of, you know, I create a plan. There's a place you need to start. You know, I try not to get too far ahead, you know. When I'm recording and you know, not everything has been completed, I'm not trying to jump ahead and make a rough mix that feels finished. I'm making a rough mix. I realize that it just represents what we have at that point to evaluate it, to sort of to progress it. So I don't spend too much time on a rough mix. I don't spend the time I would on a final mix. You know, if I feel a little bit lost about what needs to happen, I will spend a little bit of time trying something, but I won't in one sitting just work until I think I find a resolution. I will try something, and if I feel like it's a good representation of what I'm trying, I'll just let it be, unless it feels totally wrong. Well, then of course, if it felt totally wrong, or like, okay, that was a bad idea, well, then I'd undo it. But if it's like, well, that's interesting, okay, let's just live with that for a while. Let's go think about something else, and just kind of let that live for a little while. You know, maybe we'll try a different thing tomorrow, that kind of thing. Taking breaks and just letting my intuition kind of speak to me, and sort of realize that, you know, perspective at the end of the day, you know, at the end of the day, or well, not the end of the day, at the end of a mix, for me, you know, when I say, okay, time to stop for now, I think I've got it there, even though I know it's a really good mix. It's you know, it's headed where I want it to be. Maybe it's not 100% finished, but I'm like at a comfortable place where I need to step back and get a little evaluation before I will send it to the client, or, you know, whoever's outside of the studio is going to listen. I'll have my assistant engineer, and, you know, the folks that work with me regularly and that I communicate with regularly, I'll have them sit down and listen to it and tell them, what do you think? Because inevitably they'll say at least one thing. It's not that they'll say, I don't like that, or that's wrong. It's just like, what about this? It gives me an opportunity to take that perspective and say, well, okay, okay, let's look at that. And then I can either be like, yeah, you know, you're right. Let's look at this a little bit different. Let's change it. Or, you know what, I like it exactly the way it is. Thank you for pointing it out, but I feel really resolved and I want to keep it that way. And, you know, you can use the opportunity to make a mix and then play it out in the world. Ask your friends to listen to it. Ask your mom or dad, or, you know, or your brother or sister, and just like, you know, what do you think? I mean, I listened to some music over the weekend with my wife that I was been working on, and she's a hard critic, but, you know, she was like, you know, it's like there's just something a little bit missing, and that's one of the reasons that I'm looking at possible revising some of the mastering today. So yeah, hopefully that some of that helps. It's in being a good producer, I know, you know, in being a good producer, it's like a people management skill, right? And the people that I engage with, I need to be an effective leader, and I need to pay attention to what people are doing, saying, and thinking, where their strengths and weaknesses lie. I need to effectively manage myself. I need to, as objectively as possible, be able to step outside of myself and look at the way I'm doing things and conducting things, and sort of like kind of coach myself. It's a very difficult job if you are the engineer, the producer, the mixer, the artist, the mastering engineer. It's just like so much. You got to give yourself a lot of space, and try and treat each job separately as much as you can to have the perspective.
Awesome. Christian asks, how much difference do pro converters make when recording, for example, vocals? I use an Apollo with a 1073, but when compared with a Pro Studio raw tracks, it sounds kind of muddy.
Well, I mean, I don't know which Apollo you're using. I think the newer generations sound better than the older ones, but the older ones certainly sounded pretty good to me as well. Excuse me. I don't think that it's the fault of, honestly, I don't think that it's the fault of the converter or the software, because I know that stuff to be of very high quality, and use it myself, have used it successfully. And if you're comparing it to what maybe tracks you've gotten from a pro studio, it's kind of hard to hear. It's kind of hard to know without actually hearing it. But what my intuition experience is telling me is that maybe the vocal mic that you are using or have chosen is not the best for that particular voice. The voice is a very hard thing to record, and the microphone matters more than anything, more than the mic pre and the compressor and, you know, the converter, all that stuff. The right mic choice is the most important thing when recording a vocal. So, you know, without having more information than the question as it is, I would point to the mic choice.
Awesome. Lucas asks, how long do you feel it took you for you to reach a place of professional confidence in your career? And did you feel more accomplished in one particular role, i.e. producer, tracking, mixing, prior to the others?
Well, that's a good question. I think, you know, well, I'll tell you this, I feel very confident making records. No doubt. I don't, you know, but do I have anxiety and concern when I walk into a new situation? And do I have the internal human dialogue of like, you know, doubting myself? Well, of course, it's human nature. But because I have the confidence and experience, I can kind of talk myself down on the ledge, or I know that I can utilize that nervous energy as a positive force to go in and challenge myself to really meet the day ahead and the task ahead. In terms of like, when did I realize, you know, I think the typical, and the way it went for me is that you learn probably to become a good recording engineer first. In terms of being a producer, that just takes a little bit more time and a little bit more interaction, because not only is that a technical skill, but it's a people skill. And then I would say, depending on where for me, I had a lot more opportunities to be a recording engineer and then a mixing engineer before I was given, you know, a lot of opportunity as the reins as a producer. I started producing from the very beginning when bands would come in, when I was assistant engineer at the first studio I worked at, and the bands or artists would come in on the late night hours and they'd put me on the sessions. Well, a lot of them didn't come in with producers, and you start kind of producing by proxy and default, that you're there at the studio kind of helping run the session, and you have some sort of experience and expertise to kind of help guide things, or that you see where things are kind of slowing down and somebody doesn't know what to do, and you offer a suggestion when it feels appropriate. So they build on each other. As I became a better mixer, then that informed me and made me a better recording engineer, because I was starting to understand better as a mixer what tracks sounded, how tracks sounded better, and how they were easier to manage in a mix. So that kind of told me how to be a better recording engineer. And then when you go back and you become a better recording engineer, the work that you do there kind of then as a mixer, it makes it even simpler, and then you see where you can get out of your own way, and that mixing is not necessarily about doing a lot of stuff. It's about doing the appropriate stuff. And quite often when I mix my own material, there's a few steps or a few tricks or things in my template or things that I might do with someone else's material to get it to sound how I want in the mix, as opposed to I can kind of skip some of those steps for myself. And just building confidence. But I'll be perfectly honest with you. Last year, I can think of 2 situations for projects that I was working on that just didn't continue, because for whatever reason, it just wasn't gelling and coming together the way that it should, and the parties moved on. That happens, and although it was disappointing, a little aggravating business wise, I was really putting forth my best effort, but not everything works out. Not every record I make is a hit. I would say that for someone that has as successful as a discography as I do, you probably only know me for anywhere from 2 to 10% of the work I've done. So that's just the way that it is. You're going to get fired. Not every project's going to turn out amazing, and you're going to do things that even though I've made great records, they haven't. The label didn't believe in it enough in the right way, which maybe is wrong or right. It just didn't have an opportunity. Bands break up. There's all kinds of reasons. So, confidence is just kind of it's a building thing, and one job sort of informs the other.
Great. This next question comes from Peter. He asks, how much does the recording sample rate influence the overall record sound? Do you always do 88.2 or 96 kilohertz, or does it make sense to just work on 44.1 kilohertz? And what about the sample rates when you use virtual instruments?
I typically work at 48. I don't think 44 sounds good enough. I think 48 is kind of the happy medium, and that's typically what I work at most of the time. Certainly if you are transferring from analog tape to digital, higher sample rates are better. I've done that in the past. 88.2 and 96K, they're really good. I mean, of course they do have an influence on the sound. I think for most forms of popular music where the arrangements and volume are pretty dense, that 48 is perfect. I think if you have stuff that's more dynamic, acoustic, there's a bit more depth. Like if you're recording classical music or all acoustic music, that's some of the higher sample rates can be advantageous. But my recommendation is 48, and that although a lot of sample libraries and pop music gets made at 44.1, and it's a sound that we're all very used to, in terms of the amount of extra data that you're going to create between 44 and 48, just in terms of hard drive space, it's worth it for the little bit of extra. To go from 48 up to 88.2 or 96, that's a bit more of a decision to make on your own.
Great. Alan asks, can a musician really self-produce a successful record in his or her home studio? We are not professional producers and surely cannot master everything that professionals do. Is that sort of a dream illusion that is being sold today to musicians?
I mean, no, I wouldn't say that it's impossible. It certainly is possible. And there's, there are a number of examples throughout, record making history where, people have been able to do that. Prince would be a good example. Todd Rundgren, Billie Eilish, her and her brother. It's just like I think it totally is possible. I mean, there's all kinds of different references you can make, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and it's it sort of takes some special circumstances, because even though some of the names that I've named, it's like to be able to do it consistently over and over again is a challenge as well. And having just someone else's opinion or help and expertise is hugely valuable. I don't think that it's an impossibility. It's not very likely. So the idea that this is being sold as, something for everybody can do it. It's not realistic. But it's not impossible. And I would encourage you to not shy away from it if you feel like that's what you want to do, and you want to give it a shot. But just realize that you have to be honest about the outcome. And maybe it's a great learning experience and will help you in the future with future material or collaborations. But yeah, it's just the odds are kind of long and it's very difficult. I think you're better off, especially early on as you gain experience, and build on your skill sets, that partnering with others is important, because even if you don't fully agree with the way they do things, you'll learn from it. And everything can be successful if the information and the experience is just sort of treated the right way. Nothing should be considered as like your one shot. I think some people put too much pressure on whatever their first material is that they release, or that it's got to be perfect, or because this is my opportunity. Well, the thing is typically that kind of thinking, you overwork and overanalyze and procrastinate putting material out. And really, an artistic journey and a career is a path. And so you have to start, and the further you get down the path, hopefully the more experienced and mature and potent as a creator you become, and that the greatest work is yet to come. But if you don't put something out and kind of begin the journey, well, then you're just sort of holding yourself back.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question comes from Stevie. And the question is, what would you do differently from a production point of view if you're doing an instrumental album where there's no vocals? Is there a different approach?
I don't. Well, I mean, when you're doing an album, you're doing music with a vocal. I mean, typically the feeling and the melody of the voice and the story that it's telling doesn't necessarily have to be telling a complete story or something that you can follow, like you can follow specifically. And that doesn't necessarily, when I say story, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be something you can follow and that has a beginning and middle and end conclusion. But typically with music that there's a voice, I mean, that is the primary melody, and it is what the rest of the message, whatever the message may be, whether it's a love story, or it's nonsensical, or just about creating a feeling. The music is typically there to support that idea or that feeling. So in instrumental music, you don't have that same foundation of support. It's more about interplay. And typically in instrumental music, there is a little bit more leading melody from different instruments. Now, if it's instrumental music where there is a specific instrument that is the star of the show, well, then that kind of goes back a little bit towards how you'd support a vocal. But they're a little different. But I think in terms of the process and how I would engage it, it wouldn't be terribly different. It's still about communication with the artist and like getting their vision across as a record. There's nuance to it, but it's not a completely different process in my mind in the way I would approach it. It's a similar thing. It's just what you're supporting and the interaction is a little different.
Great. This next question just came in. It says, as someone who's starting a bit late in his career with no musical background, what's your advice to fast track my career as an audio engineer and ensure that the fact that I don't play an instrument doesn't influence it negatively?
Just make sure that that you're well versed as a listener in music, that you understand the difference between different genres, what the instrumentation is, like what some of the instrumentation cues are between different genres, what the rhythms are, and just sort of what some of the aesthetics of different styles and genres of music are, not necessarily so that you can copy them, but so that you can have a creative conversation and you understand perhaps where people's influence and inspiration comes from, and then how as a record making participant that you can interpret and frame that stuff. I don't think, I'm not a very accomplished musician myself, but I understand music theory. I understand the way instrumentation participates with one another. I can talk about an arrangement. There's a lot of things that I understand about music theory and the conversation. Just because I don't have a tremendous amount of strong facility is not necessarily a limitation. You just need to be as educated as you possibly can about the things I was talking about with instrumentation and genres and rhythms and aesthetics like that, but then also be a student of recorded history and how records were made at different points in time and different decades, and just be a student of the record making process. Not to be overly technical, but to understand how the process of making records and the technology at any one given time was a factor in the way that they were able to put something together to have a record be an expression of a song and a musical idea.
Great. And following on from that, what's your advice in training your ears to be able to hear and feel compression in context, and also other areas like EQ, etc.? Just to give that question some context, a lot of people ask this in various forms. People going through the course often have difficulty hearing the subtle changes that you make.
Yeah.
And that's what it relates to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. Yeah. I mean, I realize that some of the things that I demonstrate or show are, if you're paying attention, if I, like, let's say I was, EQing an acoustic guitar and sort of, the differences between it not EQ'd and EQ'd and the way I decide to do it, it is a subtle change. But one of the things that's very important in training your ear, especially when you're working as an engineer mixer, is the change that you're making. Obviously, you need to listen to that acoustic guitar and be able to identify what it is specifically about that sound you want to change. But you need to listen to it in how it affects the whole. So when you when you change the equalization or compression on something, yes, it changes that specific sound, but it also changes the way that it combines with other things. So, you need to listen to its effect on the whole thing. Let's say we wanted to make that acoustic guitar brighter. Well, how you go about making it brighter, it's just like, well, do I use a shelf upper frequency and kind of like boost it that way? And is that so high that it kind of starts to interfere with the clarity of the cymbals or the voice? Is there some place lower, maybe 3 or 4 or 5,000 cycles, where you use a little bell curve, where there's a little bit of a space to kind of accentuate that sound where it doesn't step on anything else? Always, kind of always listening to changes towards the whole as opposed to just the specifics. And just in terms of training your ear, I can hear, I know what frequency it is just from listening to something. I know what frequency it is on any one given thing that I want to go in and affect. Generally, I'm usually pretty close, and that just comes from experience. The way you could kind of train yourself is take a multi-band compressor and take a multi-band compressor, like it's got maybe 4 bands, and listen to a record or a piece of music that you didn't work on, or something you admire, you kind of want to figure out. And just, if you want to just listen to where the vocal is, listen to that upper mid-range band, turn the other ones off and just filter it down to that, and kind of listen to what exists in that band. Maybe you set that band to be from like 800 cycles or 1,000 cycles up to like 3K. Well, what's going on in that band around the voice? And you kind of start to understand where things live in the spectrum, and then put an EQ after that, and kind of like start to, fish around and hear different EQ points, or put an EQ on a whole mix and kind of, isolate or crank something up and kind of fish around and listen for it. And compression, play with the attack and release on something quite a bit, and sort of listen to what the way the attack time, how it shapes the transients and sort of the apparent brightness and dynamic of something. And then the release, it's about how long it stays in compression, and how sustained it is. Or, if you have a really short release time with a kind of an aggressive bit of compression, especially like on room mics, it makes the ambience feel like it's jumping up. It really just takes some time. But take some recorded music of someone else's, like your favorite song, and just put it in your workstation and compress it a little bit, EQ it a little bit. Do the thing where I was talking about with the multi-band compressor, and just so you can isolate things, or just do a little bit of forensic research to start to train your ear. And when you're recording things, or you can go, if you have like if you have a sample library, like if you're working in Logic or something, you probably have all kinds of instruments available to you as sample packs. Pull up like Fab Filter EQ, which I use a lot, has a spectral, I think the EQ in Logic does too, has a sort of a spectral display of what's going on. Well, just sort of begin to study that stuff. And we should work to use our ears, but as you're learning, there's nothing wrong with using your eyes as visual confirmation and of what it is that you're hearing, so that you can feel confident in your training. And so hopefully some of that helps.
Awesome. So we're just nearing 1 hour. So is it cool if I ask just a couple more questions?
Sure. Do you mind if I just run to the bathroom real quick?
No problem.
Okay, I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. How many more questions do you think we have, Dan?
Say that again, sorry?
How many questions do you think we have?
I wanted to ask 2 more.
Okay, cool.
The first one's a quick fire question. With Chaos and the Calm with James Bay, did you record that to a click track or was that live?
Most of it was recorded to a click. Most of it was recorded to a click because I had a fair amount of the percussion that you hear was done prior to the tracking sessions in the pre-production phase to sort of support the arrangements and to be able to make the drum, the drum patterns and whatnot a little bit more interesting in terms of like how we were assessing things. But so that was recorded. Most of it was recorded to click with that production stuff in there, and then I would just quickly go through and I would select different takes to put together sometimes, like I might use the first half from take 3 and then the second half from take 6 and then the bridge from take 4, perhaps, cut those things together. And then, just listen through and do a little bit of drum tightening, just a little bit of tightening to the rhythm section. Not necessarily like putting it rigidly on the grid, but just kind of just listening through and where something felt like it was pulling a little bit against the time, maybe make a slight adjustment. That's a pretty typical process for me. Whether or not I'm using click is once I get what I feel like as the composite performance or a full take of a song, I'll go through and I'll just kind of like listen to the rhythm section, maybe tighten up a few moments, or like punch in a different drum fill, let's say, and then go on to overdubbing the guitars and vocals and piano, as in the case of Chaos and the Calm.
Awesome. And we'll end with this question. I think it's a great one to end on. Bobby asks, are there any services in the record making industry that are in short supply? And what holes do you think could be filled by a producer, musician, or engineer with great equipment but struggling to find their place?
Ooh, that is a great question. Holes.
But what are some things that frustrate you in the record making process where you wish there was a company that was handling that?
Well, that's even harder. Well, I mean, because I'm such a do it myself type of person. I don't know that there's, I think quality, like, a quality, affordable place for people to make demos with someone that's, that is professional and capable is a little bit, but then we're also in a situation, and where probably most of you are, is that there's a lot of great equipment available and you can do it on your own. So just in terms of like a business model of someone that has a facility or a skill set, and they want to fill a niche in the market, I don't think that I personally cannot think of any one area where you can have a predictable business model to fill a need, because really this is like, even though it's very technical and we surround ourselves with gear, at the end of it, it's a very creative job. And so your creative skills and your decision making with your tools are what has to appeal to the market. Trying to create some awareness for yourself around that. I don't know. I just can't honestly think of any one place. I don't really farm out like editing the way some people do. I mean, maybe this is just a difficult question for me, but some people send their tracks off for someone that they trust to edit and tune the vocals and all that kind of stuff. That's not me. I do that stuff in house. Now I do delegate, and there's definitely division of labor, but it's all all done under this roof, if you will, with my oversight and my interaction. But there are, I know that there are people, facilities where that's kind of what they do. A lot of it, they edit tracks for people, they add samples, do tuning. I think that that's just kind of not for me. So I'm really just trying to think of, I think what I tell students, like I go talk to the Blackbird Academy, to every class as they're getting near the end. And one thing I tell them, for those that are maybe staying in this town, or if they go back to their own town, is find people at your same level, that have an ambition and a skill set and a desire to do something that's not quite your wheelhouse, but it's complementary. So someone getting out of the Blackbird Academy with a little home rig, it's like, well, go to open mics and find a songwriter performer that you like, and sort of see if you can partner with them to help them kind of create demos for their material, so that you're kind of developing together and you're creating opportunities for one another. You're maybe helping them get a better representation of their songs together, and so you're kind of learning with them, and then they are providing you an opportunity because they will be going out and looking to get a publishing deal, or a manager might sign them or something like that. And then by being associated with it, you may not carry on with them. They might get a publishing deal or a record deal off the work that you guys did, and then then someone that's more experienced kind of comes in and makes that record with them. But the people along the way will have awareness of you, and maybe when it's time for that manager or so and so to want to develop an artist, they think of you to kind of help on that next project. That's the advice I can give. I'm sorry, I feel like that's kind of a tough one to end on too, because I don't really know where those opportunities are. But that's really goes back to really good self-analysis, and what are your strengths, and what and what can you see in the market where you want to try to develop something. I think specializing, of course, is great, but dangerous early on. You need to sort of be available to as many things as possible, to learn where your strengths are and where your opportunities are. And then over time, maybe you can kind of narrow down to being just a mix engineer or just a producer, or I think being someone that is a good collaborator. If you have a studio facility and if you have good musician skills and you can create tracks for people, I think that's a good service to provide. So that's probably the best I can do, Dan.
Awesome. I mean, just to help with that last question, I know Spotify recently acquired soundbetter.com, and soundbetter.com is where you can find other session musicians or mix engineers or recording engineers, vocalists, whatever you need. So because Spotify's acquired them, they're really heavily promoting them. There's a lot of artists, but not enough providers. So if you are a mix engineer or recording engineer or musician, do get yourself listed on sites like soundbetter.com or airgigs.com, because there are a lot of artists, but the wait times for getting someone to work on your song are quite long at the moment. So that would just be the last piece of advice I have on that.
That's fantastic. I did not know any of that. And I guess, sort of that's fantastic that you shared that. I'm actually going to look into that just out of curiosity. That's very cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Jacquire.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Again, thanks everyone for being here. I'm sorry if we didn't get to everyone's question. But I super appreciate you being here and buying the course. And I hope that you are definitely finding that you're getting more than your money's worth out of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll get the recording of this Q&A posted in the members area, and we'll send you all an email as well so that you can find it easily. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye.